Welcome to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And before I get started on the video, just want to let everybody know I will be live tonight for Talking Giants with Bad Dog. So hopefully you guys come on over there for that as we talk about really, we just talk with you guys. You guys really drive the show right now. There's not a ton of news going on in the New York Giants world, but I'm sure you guys will ask some great questions. And as always, we'll have some great conversations. So I'll be live for that. In addition to that, I will be live Sunday night where I start to have more subscribers on the channel. So that's a lot of fun getting back to that. But in this video, I'm going to jump into, as I had you guys vote on, the most underrated players on the New York Giants. And I'm going to explain exactly what classifies as underrated. But first, I wanted to pull up the poll. I had you guys vote on it. So far, it's got 755 votes. And, I'm sure we'll have over 1,000 soon. But it looks as if most underrated won the competition. I want to get a quick video up for you guys. And after this, tomorrow or the day after, I'll be doing my most overrated New York Giants. And I know that'll probably stir up a lot more controversy because I know that there's fans that don't like to believe that any players on the team are overrated. Now, the way that I'm assessing this is in the fan base, not throughout the NFL. I'm talking about by Giants fans, players that I feel like are underrated by the fan base just from communicating with fans. And this is just my opinion. It's not set in stone. It doesn't mean I'm right, but I'm going to give you guys reasoning as to why I feel that these individuals are underrated. And there's a number of reasons why I went about saying that I feel these players are underrated. Some of it has to do with how they got here and, whether it's a bad contract, whether it's a trade, and I think maybe they're undervalued by certain fans. Now, some guys that I thought about that I didn't quite crack the list, Julian Love. I know Julian Love is a fan favorite. I know that PFF said he's the most underrated player on the team according to their measurement. I made a video on that. But he only started, I think, 4 or 5 games last year. I just feel like it's too small of a sample size for me to say he's one of the most underrated players on this football team. He just hasn't been in the league long enough. And as much as I liked him, and as much as I think he could have a very bright future with this team, I need to see more before I feel like he's underrated. Like I said, I think a lot of New York Giants fans have a lot of love for him. To be underrated, you have to be underappreciated. There has to be a lot of people in the fan base that don't think very highly of you. Another player that I thought of, but I think that he's very appreciated, is Dexter Lawrence. I think he is going to be the best player on this year's defense. I really do believe that. I think he's kind of on the come up of really being a Pro Bowl level talent. I think he's going to be that good of a football player for the Giants, but he didn't make the list because I don't really view him as underrated. I think a lot of New York Giants fans recognize his value to the football team right now in the present and in the future and feel that it was a pretty good draft pick there by Dave Gettleman. The guys I'm going to talk about are guys that you may not necessarily like, guys that you really don't value that highly on this football team that I think maybe fans should value a little bit higher than they necessarily might. So let's jump right into it. The first group, it's actually a group of players that I'm going to jump into are 2 special team specialists. One was on the New York Giants last year with Cody Core, the other Nate Ebner. And I think it's just an undervalued, underrated aspect of this football team in general. I think the New York Giants are going to be one of the best in the league in terms of special teams coverage, and Nate Ebner is going to bring that to this football team. He's known as one of the best in punt coverage in the entire league. You pair that with Cody Core. Cody Core was magnificent for the New York Giants last year. I mentioned his name as much as anybody during my live streams, and I think both of them are going to have a lot of value to this football team. As good as the New York Giants special teams was last year, I think it's going to be that much better when you bring in a guy like Nate Ebner that's known for that, and you bring in Joe Judge, who's known to be one of the best special teams coaches in the business. After all, he learned under Nick Saban, he learned under Bill Belichick, and he got a lot out of the players that were on his roster. The New England Patriots, I think, had the best special teams unit in all of football last year. And if the Giants are going to win games this year, they're going to have to win in the hidden yardage areas. And I think players like Cody Core and Nate Ebner will probably be underappreciated. They're not guys that show up in the stat box, but they're guys that could help win you football games. So I wanted to point to the special teams for the New York Giants because I do think it will be a driving force for this team this year that maybe isn't as recognized as it necessarily should be. Next guy we're going to talk about is Kevin Zeidler. And I think most people realize that Kevin Zeidler is the most accomplished offensive lineman on the New York Giants roster. But I think because the New York Giants offensive line was as poor as it was last year, even after the addition to Zeidler, maybe people don't realize how good he was last year. And I went into an article by Patricia Traina to really look and see what he meant to this offensive line last year. And another thing I've said is the O-line may have been a lot better than it looked like on paper last year because they were dealing with a rookie quarterback, which is a common problem, right? Rookie quarterbacks definitely struggle in pre-snap coverages, things like that, and it doesn't do your offensive line any favors, not to mention Saquon Barkley, the team's best weapon, was out for half the season. But Zeidler certainly did his job. I mean, the tackles didn't. Nate Solder was horrible. Mike Remmers was not very good. John Halapio didn't really get the job done. But Zeidler, when you look at the numbers and when you really factor in just how poor the offensive line were around him, right? Because the offensive line is a unit. And when you have Remmers to your left and you have Halapio to your right and you still perform as well as he did, it says something. But let's jump into the exact stats about Kevin Zeidler. And, of course, he was known to be a very good offensive lineman to begin with the Browns. I think he was top 5 in the league per PFF over the last 2 years while in Cleveland. Per PFF, he allowed just 22 total pressures, the fewest of all starting offensive linemen. And if grades mean anything to you, Zeidler was the highest graded Giants starting offensive lineman in both pass protection and run blocking. According to the NFL's official stats, the Giants averaged 5.21 yards per carry running through the right guard hole, the best average on runs between the tackles. So I remember I made an article I made a video talking about an article which talked about how Barkley was essentially either the first or second best running back in football last year running between the tackles. Well, the position that he did the best with in terms of running behind was the right guard, and of course that is Kevin Zeidler. Zeidler meant a lot to this New York Giants football team last year, and he's going to mean a lot to them in 2020. And I do think he's undervalued, at least by some members of the fan base, because a position like the offensive line doesn't get all the credit that it necessarily deserves. So I wanted to make notice of him. Next guy we're going to talk about is a guy that you may hate, and I completely understand it. And he is definitely overpaid, and I definitely understand not liking the trade. Okay? It was a bad trade, never made a lot of sense. But Leonard Williams, when he came to the New York Giants last year, definitely made an impact, and I think he's definitely a good football player. So for people that, I think certain people may not value him as highly as they should as a football player. They may hate the fact that he's on the team because of the fact that we got ripped off in a trade, but as a football player, as a pure talent, Leonard Williams is a solid player, and he definitely impacted the New York Giants defensive line. The problem is he thinks he's worth $18 to $20 million. But when you go back and look at the numbers last year, the New York Giants had 4 games out of the 8 that he played in where they surrendered 80 yards or less in those contests on the ground. Over the first 8, they only had 1 game in which they surrendered less than 80. So he certainly had a big impact in terms of the run defense for the New York Giants. And you saw players like Dalvin Tomlinson, who's another guy I could have easily mentioned, who I think is underrated as well, get better once Leonard Williams got here. And I think he's only going to help this defense even more, being that they'll be more accustomed to playing with one another. I also think the fact that I pointed to in the past, the guy had 19, I think, quarterback hits, which led the league at his position, goes to show you that it should translate to more sacks this year. Will it translate to 8 or 10? Probably not. But I think he could have more of an impact in that area, and I do think he is a good player, just isn't worth the money that he's getting paid. But yes, I think by a portion of this fan base, he is underrated. And then the last guy, and it's a guy that I've said that I've thought about cutting, to save money next year. But when you really look at the numbers and you look at how Golden Tate played last year, he was a very good wide receiver for the New York Giants. But, you hear countless articles about how bad the New York Giants receiving core is, and I get it. They don't have a great exterior threat. Golden Tate's more of a slot guy. He's 5'10". He's a great yak guy. Might be the best yard after catch receiver in the league. He's great at breaking tackles and busting off big plays after the fact. But when you look at what he had, and it could be a bit of an abnormality when you look at his career stats, but you look at what he did for the New York Giants last year in just 11 games. He had a very strong season for the New York Giants, and I get why people don't like him. They don't understand the signing. I understand it. He's up there in age. I think he's going to be 31 this year, and it was a team that was in rebuild mode. You spent a lot on the wide receiver position by bringing him in. So I completely understand that aspect of it, even though the New York Giants needed a wide receiver. I've talked about that they didn't know how good Darius Slayton necessarily was going to be. But Golden Tate, I think, is underrated by certain people. People may not value him as high as they should. Look at the numbers that he posted last year with the New York Giants, and look at the numbers that he posted in his first 7 games in 2018 with the Detroit Lions. We'll start with that. Of course, he did horrible with the Eagles. A lot of people pointed to the fact that they felt like he didn't fit the offense. He was learning a new playbook mid-season. That's never easy for a wide receiver to do. With Detroit, in just 7 games, he had 517 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he was on pace to have about 7 touchdowns and probably about 1,100 yards, racking up about 90 catches. He had 44 catches in 7 games. So he had probably even 100 catches. So he had a very strong half season or near half season with the Detroit Lions the prior year. Last year with the New York Giants, he only played in 11 games. He started 10 for the Giants. And like I said, the touchdowns may be a bit of an abnormality. You go back and look at his career, he's never a big touchdown guy. His yards per catch were way up. His touchdowns were way up. He had 676 yards in just 11 games. Had he played 16 games, he was on pace to crack 1,000 yards. He was on pace to have about 9 or 10 touchdowns. And I think there was only a handful of receivers last year who had 10 or more touchdowns. So he was incredibly productive for the New York Giants last year in the limited sample size that he was provided. And he averaged 13.8 yards per catch. And of course, I remember some of the big catches he had, one of which was against the New England Patriots. I think Tate, actually, when I really thought about it, is a bit underrated by the New York Giants fan base. And I'm not telling you he's a number 1 wide receiver. I don't think he is, but I still think he's a very good wide receiver. And I think he will help Daniel Jones here in year number 2. A guy that can make big plays. The one knock on him is that he doesn't create a lot of separation, which was the biggest knock on this New York Giants receiving core to begin with. He's not a guy that's going to pose a great threat on the outside, but he's definitely still a very skilled wide receiver, if he's not getting suspended, that I think will help Daniel Jones in year 2, and I think could be a nice vital piece to this New York Giants offense. So there you have it. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.